This is the Education Gadfly Show.
Welcome to the Education Gadfly Show. I'm Stephanie Disler, here to kick off this week's episode. Today, Brian Jodice, National Press Secretary for the American Federation for Children, joins us for a lively debate and deep dive on the federal school choice provision in the newly passed One Big Beautiful Bill, including how it might play out in blue states. Then, on the Research Minute, Adam shares an Education Next study showing that a low-cost college planning course can boost success for high-achieving, low-income students. All this and more on the Education Gadfly Show, starting now.
Hello, this is your host, Mike Petrilli of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, here at the Education Gadfly Show and online at fordhaminstitute.org. And now, please join me in welcoming today's special guest, Brian Jodice. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Mike, good to be with you guys. Appreciate it and excited for the conversation.
Also joining us, as always, my co-host, David Griffith.
Hey, Mike. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, Brian is the National Press Secretary for the American Federation for Children. That is one of the nation's leading school choice groups out there. You might know it as the group that Betsy DeVos helped to create. And we are here to talk about, you guessed it, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Let's do that, Brian and David, on Ed Reform Update. Brian and David, we're going to just cut right to the chase here because there's so much to talk about. We have talked about the school choice provision within this bill before. This is, of course, Trump's big tax and budget bill. The last time we talked about it, let's see, we had John from Brookings on. We've talked about it with Jim Blue at Defending Freedom Institute. But this was before the bill went through the whole legislative sausage making. And as happens sometimes, the way it went in is not the way it came out. The Senate parliamentarian is in charge of deciding whether anything in a bill violates the so-called Byrd rule, which says that if you're going to use budget reconciliation and therefore you're not subject to the filibuster, you can pass something just on just with 50 votes. It can't put in too much policy making. It's got to really try to be strictly about budget, taxes, that sort of thing. It also can't have mandates on the states, I believe, or there's some issues around that. So the parliamentarian stripped out a bunch of what was originally in the school choice provision in there. Among other things, she said that the provision cannot require states to participate in this thing. There was a cap introduced in terms of how much people could donate at an individual time, and a bunch of the other policy pieces were taken out. For example, some language that said that states would not be allowed to add their own requirements on top of what's in the federal legislation. So in the end, and Brian, I'm going to bring you in a second here to fact check me on all this stuff. What it says is individual taxpayers, if they can donate up to $1,700 to a scholarship granting organization, they can then get that $1,700 back off their taxes. It's a credit, dollar for dollar. So some people might say, well, that's not much of a donation. You're basically saying, hey, spend $1,700 of my taxes on this instead of just, general government. Then the scholarship granting organizations, they have to be approved in a given state. States have to choose to opt in the first place. And then those scholarship granting organizations can make scholarships to, for example, kids to participate and attend private schools. Eligible kids under the provision, it's those families earning up to 300% of a median income in a given metro area, which in wealthy places like DC is a lot of money, as in like over $400,000. So we're talking about all but the richest families that are eligible for this thing. Did I get that right?
No, Mike, you're tracking well, and that's a really good summary as to kind of where we came from and where we ended up. So way to follow it along in what was wild sprint to the finish here.
Yeah. And look, I know there were a lot of disappointment in that, a big piece of this was taken out. I think somebody was saying, they swung for the fences, hoping for a home run, and they got a single. Still pretty remarkable, historic, that promotes school choice and would potentially allow it nationwide. Now, there are a couple of debates going on within the school choice world about what exactly this thing does and how it's going to work. By the way, it doesn't start till 2027, so we have some time to figure this stuff out. One big debate is whether this is only for private school kids, or whether public school kids, charter school kids could benefit, because it says you can spend the money on private school tuition, but also on other things that are right now eligible expenses over what's called the Coverdell education savings accounts. These are things like tutoring, computers for instructional purposes, even internet access, textbooks, and the like. Not exactly enrichment stuff, but definitely ancillary academic expenses. There's a line in the bill, though, Brian, that says something about private school attendance, and some people are reading that as meaning that no, only private school kids can benefit. Others think that public school kids, charter school kids can benefit too. What do you say?
Yeah, well, I mean, first and foremost, and you really are tracking this well, Mike, which is incredible because, I mean, there were a lot of details that were kind of changed in this sort of 11th hour, right? That we would talk about things like that. And so I think first and foremost, I would say there's going to be a rules making process that's going to have to happen with this, like it would with a lot of other pieces of legislation. So part of this is, yeah, we can talk about and we can speculate to a sense, but with really educated opinions about it, what this is going to mean. But we also are going to have to just wait on what's Treasury going to do from a rulemaking process, and how can we ensure that this thing is set up to be implemented at its best way possible? I would say this as it relates to like what kind of students are going to be able to benefit from this. Is it just for private school kids? Is it public charter? I think part of that is open for debate right now. What I would say too is though, I want to make sure we don't forget like really what the intent of this was and where this comes from. And this is born out of the want and desire for more educational options in school choice across America. Like, and I get the parliamentarian can interject it and make adjustments to this to ensure it sort of met those different thresholds. And we can maybe agree or disagree about whether that was overstepping the bounds or not. But the intent is to create educational options and to help families get access away from a system that's not really meeting their needs anymore. And so when you look at what we want to be able to do with this, and our goal at AFC specifically is to ensure that every kid in America who wants school choice can get school choice, then I think we've got to try to see that through to make sure we can get there. So we'll see what the rules process bears out. We'll obviously be fighting for low-income families across America, number one, first and foremost, but then also for families to be able to leverage something like this in their states to be able to get their kids some sort of school choice and educational freedom. And then to your point about, and we can go deeper on what it's going to look like in the states and how governors are going to be able to opt in and what those rules and regs can look like. But I think you're reading it right, and I think that's part of what we're going to have to figure out. But I think what we'd say is, look, man, we've seen thousands, if not millions of families across America demanding access to something different than what they're zoned for based on their zip code and their income. Mm-hmm. And there's also a real conversation around, there's $1 trillion, almost $1 trillion a year flowing through traditional public schools. We don't need to be creating some sort of scholarship program that's going to subsidize that any further. In fact, we need to be creating more options outside of that.
Okay, but I hear you. But as a public school parent, this would be great to be able to access, right, tutoring, let's say a mini scholarship for tutoring. Total aside, well, not total aside, it's still in the bill. The bill also has some new provisions around 529s that, by the way, make more flexible for what you can use those 529 accounts for. Already, you could use it for private school tuition. My understanding is now things like sending your kid to the tutoring center is also something you can do.
And I think there's something too, and ideologically, I think I tend to agree with you, right? Like, because kids that are in need of something more, if there's a way to get that for them, there should be a way to get that for them. Now, you could probably.
But Brian, let's get back. I'm just trying to help our readers understand. I mean, there is language in there that refers to private school attendance, but it is your understanding that there's some wiggle room, that there's some way you could read the bill as saying that even public school parents could be eligible.
No, I think you're reading it right. No, I think you're reading it right. Okay. So that's where you have to see what rules making looks like. And then also, to the other point, the SGOs are the ones that will ultimately then make the rules in the state in which they're granting those scholarships. Now, Treasury rules can dictate some of that as well. And that speaks to your point about, regulations. One of the things that we're obviously always careful of is, to over-regulate a program, to put that camel's nose under the tent is something that candidly folks in the private school space, even public charter school space, they're not into that. There's a reason why in which they're seeking out these alternative options. So it's something you have to look at.
All right. Now, the next debate is about this question about whether states can tailor make
Right.
the program if they want to. I have a piece this week in the Wall Street Journal where I argue that even though this was unintentional, right? Originally, the goal was to make it a requirement, a mandate available nationwide. The fact that it is now something states have to opt into, and that the language was pulled out about states not adding new requirements could create some interesting politics, especially in blue states. We want blue states to opt into this, right? and we don't want to give, say, a Democratic governor another reason to say no. He's going to get a lot of pressure. She's going to get a lot of pressure from the teachers' unions, the school boards, the typical public school establishment to not do anything with this thing.
Right.
And so, for example, they might say, look, I would participate, but I don't like that it's eligible. So many upper middle class families are eligible. Or I don't like that there's no requirement for standardized testing for kids participating in the program. Well, again, my read on the language is not there much there is that if a state wanted to, let's say Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania could say, all right, we're going to participate, but I'm only going to approve scholarship granting organizations that promise to fund just low income and working class kids in Pennsylvania, and that promise to test them using some kind of test so we know if this thing is working. That way we might get to yes, because again, it's a strong argument. You're like, Governor Shapiro, this is not going to cost you a cent. This
Right.
money is coming
Which is a
from
great
taxpayers
argument.
all
That's a
over the
great
country.
point, Mike, right?
Yeah.
That's a great point, right? No cent from the federal government, no dollar from the state or local governments as well. So this whole theory of, right, like it's going to siphon money away. We've seen the teachers unions use the same talking point on this tax credit scholarship as they would a traditional voucher. It's going to siphon money away. Well, obviously that's not true. What I would tell Governor Josh Shapiro specifically is, boy, polling across all of Pennsylvania, specifically in low income and minority communities, shows how wildly popular school choice is, and the idea of putting dollars in kids' backpacks to go to the schools of their choice, really popular, even in Philadelphia, like really popular. So you might want to look at that too before you go fight tooth and nail against something like this, because again, that's what the majority of people want, even in a blue state like that. So there's going to be some conversations that have to be had about fighting against it. I think the 300% of that median household income in the area where you live protects against that component of it. And then to the testing piece, we've long believed that testing is an important part of accountability, but it's not the end all be all. And often remind that kids in private schools across America are taking nationally normed tests all the time that are being reported back to their parents that are driving data, while data continues to show in states like Ohio, right, which is very important for you guys, that the Ohio Ed Choice program is making college more attainable. It's making even more attainable for kids going to traditional public schools around those choice programs. So I think all of that has to be a part of the conversation versus just, yeah, we'll take the program, but we're going to make the kids take an EOG. Like a state like North Carolina, where I live, we've got end of grade tests. And the teachers union, the public school folks have always said, why can't the Opportunity Scholarship kids in North Carolina take EOGs? And we say, but they're taking nationally normed tests that are being reported back to their parents. And oh, by the way, I'm old enough to remember when public school kids in my home state took nationally normed tests, but we weren't doing so hot. So they rewrote it and made these end of grade tests that are administered by the state to show a little bit of a different story. So it's such a, you get it. It's such a nuanced conversation about what it's going to mean to look at that. You can't compare that data straight up.
All right, Brian, I got to call you out on that one. Come on, that was a completely upside down history. What used to happen was that those nationally normed tests showed under the Lake Wobegon effect that everybody was above average, right? This was like the Garrison-Keillor line. It was only with the advent of the state tests and making it criterion based that we saw that actually so many kids were not on track.
Yeah, but I'd also tell you the idea that you're going to have kids on an opportunity scholarship take an EOG that matches the kids in their traditional public schools when they're learning potentially different curriculum packages. That just doesn't make sense to try to compare those two and just say, well, we'll just have these kids take this test. And then they'll show us how great they're doing. I don't think it's that easy either, though.
Right. So now, again, to the factual question, there's been some debate on whether a Governor Shapiro could add that kind of requirement, say to scholarship granting organizations, you must, let's say, have the kids take the state test.
That's a really good question, Mike. And I've not unpacked that because I've got to think Treasury will set rules, right, for sort of the federal implementation of it. But then the state-based SGOs that are approved will set their own rules. Unless a governor was going to say, I will only approve SGOs that do X, Y, and Z, That's something that's got to be addressed. And that's why you've probably heard us say, and look, I'd liken it more than a single, right? I'd probably put us at a real strong double. And we were thinking about maybe going for third, maybe we hang back. Look, there's more work to be done. There's more work to be done to strengthen the implementation side and to make sure as many kids that want it and families that want it can get it too.
Yeah. David, I guess my curiosity for you is, can you imagine any blue state in this political environment saying yes to this? My argument in the Wall Street Journal was that this is a little bit like Medicaid expansion was 10 or 15 years ago. It was almost a freebie. It meant, constituents in your state getting important services, in that case, healthcare, in this case, scholarships to private schools. But your base is against it. In the Medicaid example, the Republican Wall Street Journal types didn't want to spend the money, didn't like this expansion. In this case, of course, the teachers unions are dead set against this. So, how do you see this playing out?
Well, I think that first question about whether or not charter kids and public school kids can benefit from it is almost the whole ball game there, right? And I don't have a strong opinion, so I'll defer to the lawyers on what exactly the bill says there. But I think it's the whole ball game. Like if anybody can benefit from it, then I think it's going to be almost impossible for governors in blue states to say, no, you can't donate to this thing so that Timmy, who's struggling to read, can get tutoring outside of school, and he's not even going to a private school. He's just going, we don't know where he's going, but he might be in a public school. I think in practice, that's not going to fly at all.
All right, but let me stop you there, David, because again, my understanding is that, yes, you're right. Josh Shapiro, governor of Pennsylvania, could say, okay, I'm only going to approve scholarship granting organizations that are providing scholarships for tutoring, and that make those scholarships available to everybody, right?
Yeah.
Or he could say, I'm going to approve those kinds of scholarship granting organizations, and I will approve scholarship granting organizations that will support private school tuition, but only for poor and working class kids in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, there's a pretty good chance of that too.
And I guess the question is there? Could you see us, Josh Shapiro or some of these other governors, taking the heat from the unions and say, look, this thing it's too good to pass up. It's a freebie. Why are we blocking the schoolhouse door or not?
Well, if you're saying the choice is between a program that's only for tutoring or for a program that's for tutoring and also for private.
Yeah. And you got to get a little bit out of your head the idea of one program.
I mean, I'm entirely in my head at this point, Mike. We're so far into the hypotheticals, but it seems to me that if you're going to be limiting the dollars that are flowing into into a state, that you're going to have a hard time politically. I feel like you use the Medicaid example, right? Many conservative governors, legislatures had mixed feelings about this expansion, but at the end of the day, there was a giant check that was essentially being dangled in front of states by and they couldn't say no, right? Red states one by one sort of said yes to this because it's just too good a deal. I suspect that some version of that will play out with this, although we've now raised so many questions about how exactly it's going to be implemented that I'm not sure.
All right, fair enough. So maybe I've half convinced you. All right. And Brian, one last question, just again on the politics, thinking of blue states, right? We want to get them to say yes to private school scholarships, right? And if that takes compromising on some of these things, again, I understand private schools would prefer not to do the testing or not to do state testing, or, they prefer for it to be near universal rather than targeted to just poor and working class kids. But if we can show some flexibility, and that means we get some blue states to say yes, is that worth it in your opinion?
Well, candidly, I think we had to show quite a bit of flexibility in what the original proposal looked like and what ended up over the finish line. So there's in a political game and anything, Mike, we've been around this long enough issues. There's always that give and take. I think from our perspective, we're always going to do everything we can to make sure this thing can be implemented the best it can, with the intent of providing real sort of educational choice, right? And you've heard us say for a long time, families shouldn't be trapped in a system that doesn't meet their needs, right? If it's working for them, great, based on their zip code or their income. And you've seen us argue for ESA programs and vouchers and tax credits in states across America. And the more we can do that to unlock it and get it to kids that are stuck in states where their the intent was, look, if you're in a state where your legislature is never going to give you a school choice program like this could be a great way to get school choice to all 50 states. It looks a little different today than it did a month ago, and it might look a little different in 2 months than it does today. We've got more work to be done to kind of get it right.
All right, we will leave it there. Thank you so much, Brian Jodice, for coming on the show. Brian is the National Press Secretary for the American Federation for Children. We'll get you back maybe someday when Treasury comes out with its draft regulations.
Yeah.
We'll have you come back, and it'll be less hypothetical.
Thanks, guys.
All right, thank you, Brian. Now it's time for everyone's favorite Adams Research Minute. Adam, welcome back to the show.
Great to be back.
I understand we both have been spending time in the great state of Utah recently. Tell me about your adventures out there.
It's a beautiful state. Yeah. I mean, the people talk about, Denver and these other places. They're all right. But man, Salt Lake City, it's got the Rockies right in your face. It's awesome.
Yeah. Well, I was out there for the Education Commission of the States conference last week, and it was great. Among other things, I kept having people come up to me saying, I listened to the podcast. I love the podcast. Keep it going. So hello out there, listeners. That's always really nice to hear. And in fact, somebody did that. I brought my wife with me on the trip, which was great. And we were in the elevator and somebody said, oh, Mike Petrilli, I listened to your podcast. And I kind of was like, see, Megan, I'm kind of like famous in this very, very small niche world of education policy. She was duly impressed.
I don't know if it has to do if there's a policy or political story behind it, but I was there for the 4th of July, and I don't know if Salt Lake City has like no regulations on neighborhood fireworks or what, but we had just like a total like fireworks show going on in the random neighborhood that we were in for our 4th of July barbecue. So we were like planning to go see one of the official ones, and it was like, why leave when the whole neighborhood is like shooting these rockets off in the air that are anyway. So it was great.
Well, yes. Well, and we got lucky. We went up to Park City and did some great hiking, which was definitely the way to do. As nice as Salt Lake City may be, it's nothing compared to the mountains themselves. And you say they're right there. Pretty awesome. Mm-hmm. Okay, enough on our travelogue. Why don't you tell us what you got on the Research Minute front?
Well, this week on the Research Minute, we are diving into a study that is all about helping high schoolers answer a big question. Should they go to college? I know that's a question that you've often had some contrary opinions on over the years, Mike. I think you'll like this study. So the paper by Amherst College economist Josh Hyman, who's also one of our emerging education policy scholars from cohorts past. He's not really emerging anymore, I don't think. But he examines what happens when schools make college planning a part of the actual curriculum. Instead of relying solely on just guidance counselors, Hyman tests a low-cost intervention where schools provide an 18-week college planning course within high school classrooms. So let's get into it. First, the problem. College advising in the U.S. is, let's be honest, deeply unequal. Many affluent families start planning for college early. They tap into their personal networks. They even hire private consultants. Most low-income students, on the other hand, mostly rely on school counselors who in many places handle caseloads of hundreds or even 1,000 or more students each. Of course, higher income families are more likely to have parents who are college educated, so they can offer advice that less affluent parents may not be able to. Not surprisingly, the information gaps that result from this show up in the outcomes. High-achieving, low-income students often don't enroll in college at all, or they enroll in less selective or less rigorous schools than they could have. And some students who aren't well prepared for college go anyway, eventually dropping out and often acquiring substantial debt in the process. This new study tests an intervention aimed at closing that information gap, specifically that 4-credit college planning course that I mentioned. It's for high school seniors, and it's taught during the normal school day. The course is 18 weeks long, costs the schools about $8 per student, and covers everything from financial aid to budgeting to choosing a major and building a resume. Most of the teachers were English teachers, although school counselors taught some of the courses as well. The study is a randomized controlled trial in which they tested the effects of this course in 62 randomly selected high schools across Michigan during the 2016-2017 school year. The effects I'll be describing are school level effects, meaning that the effects of attending a school these are the effects of attending a school that offered the course, whether or not the student actually took it, which is good from a research perspective, but might actually be underestimating the effects a little bit since it's lumping in students who didn't even take this course. The results of this were really fascinating, although maybe not a huge surprise if you expected this course to actually work. What Professor Hyman finds is that the course didn't change the overall number of students who went to college, but what did change is who enrolled. Even more importantly, the students who enrolled because of this course were more likely to persist in college and eventually to earn a degree. Specifically, when their schools offered this college planning course, high achieving students were more likely to enroll in college and lower achieving students less likely to enroll. Interestingly, the largest effects of the program were on low income students, among whom high achievers were 4%, 4 percentage points more likely to enroll in college, and then they were more likely to persist and earn a degree. Lower achieving, low income students were also more likely to persist, which makes sense since some of those students who were not likely to succeed never enrolled in the first place. Although the lower achieving, low income students had about the same 6-year graduation rate as their counterparts in the control group, despite those higher persistence rates in years 2 and 3. But it wasn't just about the choice of whether to enroll. Students also made different choices about where to enroll. Low income, low achieving students were more likely to enroll in a 4-year institution. I should say he says that the curriculum itself talks about undermatch, which is like the jargon of saying that students should always try to go to the most selective institutions that they can. Although I've always been a little bit dubious of that advice myself, but the program in the schools actually emphasizes that for students. So maybe that's part of why students responded and were more likely to enroll in a more selective institution. As far as majors are concerned, and I'll end with this, low income, high achieving students were nearly 11% more likely to pursue high earning fields like business, economics, or STEM degrees. And there was no change in enrollment in low earning majors. So we're seeing more students chasing high reward careers without just shifting from one degree to another.
Okay, very interesting. That last part, of course, I think about how we say, boy, what is a high earning career now or a year from now, given the AI revolution. So many kids went into computer science after we encouraged them to do so, and suddenly those seem to be the jobs that are going away thanks to AI. Again, that could be a short-lived phenomenon. We shall
Is that
see.
true by sector? I mean, it's true for younger, like the unemployment rate among entry jobs is a little higher, but is that disproportionately in computer science?
There's a lot of, I have seen data on there being a lot of unemployed computer science majors right now. Now, again, that could be a blip and a transition thing, but we'll see. But it's always hard to predict these things, as we say. But look, I like it. I mean, it certainly sounds like it's working. And I especially like the fact that they're trying to measure the impact of a course like this. I feel like a lot of times we add courses to high schools in these, what you might call life skills category, right? Many of which sound reasonable on their face. Hey, let's give kids a course on financial literacy, for example. But we don't actually measure whether it makes a difference. Or if we do, it doesn't seem to make a difference. So here you go. This course seems to be making some differences in terms of decisions that kids are making, which is pretty impressive, I think, because, it's one thing to give kids, young people, information to then have them act on it. That's not necessarily what I would have hypothesized you'd see. I would have guessed for a null effect here. David, what do you think?
Yeah, that last one rings true to me, right? We're conditioned to expect small effects, right? But it's pretty hard to critique the methods, right? I think, Adam, tell me if you disagree, but I feel like we should buy this, right, as an effect for the sample, at least, that was in the study. I guess if I were trying to be critical, I would say, this isn't like necessarily going to generalize nationwide, right? Like, I'm not sure that we should do it nationwide tomorrow, right? Because I assume that this was done with a lot of intent and purpose, and you can't always assume that when you expand programs. I like it though. I do. I think I don't know. I have a less skeptical take on life skills than Mike does. I tend to think that life skills are really important, and that this is it's interesting, right? It's narrower than something like health or financial literacy, right? Like this isn't really going to benefit you after the first 5 or 6 years, but it's also extremely targeted and immediate and obvious how it might benefit you, right? How it probably will. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think I'm ready to see it. I want to see it expanded, right? I want to see what happens when a big district tries this, right? Am I right in thinking that it was not required, the course,
The course was not
Adam? I mean, is
required
it
for the
not
seniors, but
required?
they tried to they I don't know exactly how they required it, but they strongly suggested that they get at least half of their seniors enrolled in it, and they ended up with like 63% or so of the seniors in the treatment schools doing it. I mean, I think one thing to remember about this intervention is that it is what's kind of different about it. This isn't just any kind of random thing. What they did is they taught classroom teachers for the most part. There were some counselors who taught some of these, but for the most part, these are regular classroom teachers. Most of them were English teachers. They taught them to do this curriculum and did the PD with them about helping these students. And I mean, one of the things that's kind of weird if you sit in a high school class for a few years, or even in college, we have this problem, is that you learn a bunch of random stuff and there's a lot of talk about, what you're going to do after, but very little really like practical planning for what you should do after you graduate from high school, how you should think about your college decisions. It's oftentimes kind of a thing that maybe the school counselor does a little session at some point and you're getting a few things that you might pick up on, but there's not really a concerted effort to help you understand the landscape and the debt you might take on and all of the decisions that you're then kind of expected to make. Well, we hope you go to college. We want you to go on and do that, right? So this is really like an intense way of kind of communicating a lot of that really urgent information. When I was in high school, I had no idea. The money else kind of seemed like fake money to me. I didn't know who was going to be on the hook for what. And it's hard to be, how can you make these huge life decisions with as little guidance as a lot of kids are getting if they don't have a really strong family support system?
Yep. And it's not just a nudge, right? Like, a bunch of text messages or something saying, go to college, because again, that's not always the right advice, as we have talked about a lot here.
But it's almost as cheap as a lot of the nudges. I mean, it was $8 per student to do it. So
now I guess the cost is that these English teachers are not teaching an English section or two. By the way, English, interesting choice. I don't know what that means.
So you have to be able to understand the financial aid documents, Mike.
Okay. This is the Common Core's focus on non-fiction text.
You need someone with extremely good command of the English language to read the fine print. But
yeah. All right.
The schools could choose which teachers or which faculty we're gonna teach the courses, but over half of them were English teachers. That's right.
I mean, Let me just say one more thing that's I think is interesting, right? Is like this. It does seem like the effects were more or less what folks like Mike would want, right? Like fewer kids who don't really belong in college going into it, more kids who are really college material but might not going into it. But it's not 1,000% clear to me why that happened. Maybe there's more detail to the study that we just didn't get to, right? But I mean, that suggests somebody somewhere is saying something like maybe you should go to college, or maybe college isn't for you. But I don't know. I can't quite tell from the information we have, but it's really interesting. I guess I'm a little skeptical that simply like providing information neutrally about college would lead to this better match, right? It makes it feel like teachers maybe were taking advantage of this opportunity to help kids make a smart decision. But I don't know. That's speculative. What do you guys think?
Right. No. And look, maybe just giving teachers the professional development in this stuff taught them some things they didn't know, because this is an area where the research has been changing, where, there used to be this conventional wisdom that everybody would benefit from going to college. And now we have better data showing that that's often the case, not always the case, So
I'll just say I struggled with a marginal case, right? Who was a former student. I did not know what to tell this person, right? Yeah. And I think, professional development for people who are near to kids at this life stage is not a terrible idea. Yeah. Because it's not always obvious.
All right, Adam, great stuff. Thank you for bringing it to us. Everyone should check that out. That was in Education Next, right?
That's right.
All right, go Ed Next. All right, well, that is all the time we've got for this week. So until next week.
I'm David Griffith.
And I'm Mike Petrilli of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, signing off.
The Education Gadfly Show is a production of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, located in Washington, D.C. For more information, visit us online at fordhaminstitute.org.